When dealing with a falsehood, you're faced with two options. You can accept it or you can reject it. The basis upon which we take one of these actions is a product of our critical thinking capabilities and a desire to know what is true instead of confirming our bias. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. On Brainstorm, we choose the hard truths over the comforting lies. Reason, compassion, skepticism. This is the Brainstorm podcast.
Hey folks, welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast Skeptic Studio, the interview show from Brainstorm where we talk to a variety of folks with the intent to spread critical thinking, compassion, and skepticism. This is another late one, but this rounds out the summer series pretty nicely. As of August 31st, we're back in the studio with a full crew, and we've got an interview with BJ Mendelsohn and all our regular segments, and I might try and do some new things with the show. This episode is an interview with Zach Law from the Zachrilegecast. And I almost made it into an episode of Skeptic Voices because Zach and I just kind of chatted about podcasting, interviewing people, life, and a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of shop talk about scheduling interviews and other stuff like that, but it was just a good chat, so that's where it is. So I guess with all that to lead into it, here's the interview with Zach. All right. Welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast Skeptic Studio. Today I'm going to talk to Zach Law of the Zachrilegecast. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, Zach, is because you've been interviewing the atheist community for a long time now. So I figured you might have some interesting insight as to the status of the community.
Well, I have insight. I've definitely talked to a lot of people.
Yeah, that's right. So, I guess, just as a background, who was your first guest?
Bobby Carey from No Religion Required was guest number one.
And that show's not even on anymore, eh?
Yeah, 10 episodes ago, I've done like 4 episodes that are like exit interviews where podcasters who have quit show up. So when they stopped doing No Religion Required, I had them on. Well, they still do, something Beyond Faith. Hope Beyond Faith, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Hope After Faith. That's the one that does Jerry DeWitt. But yeah, because the original idea for me was I listened to a lot of atheist podcasts and I was going to do a show about them. And then when I told Bobby I was going to do one on No Religion Required, he's like, well, why don't you just interview me? What a great idea, huh? So I had him on and had approximately a guest a week. I'd say a little behind that. 148 in and 3+ years. So
wow,
still plugging away. So
were you a member of the atheist community before you started the show, or for a long time before you started the show?
Whatever nebulous community that was, I suppose. I don't think I had gone to some local stuff because I live in Atlanta, Georgia, but I hadn't gone to any big conferences until I started doing a show.
Was there much online community at that time?
Yeah, it was kind of in that 2014, 2015 time where I think a lot of podcasts got started that people still know. I mean, it was still long ago enough that I could actually listen to every episode of Thinking Atheist going back right. In those days. And, I heard about No Religion Required from the Reason Con podcast that he did, which had a bunch of other podcasters. And then through that, I got to know them all because Bobby was the only one who I think was sober at that one. That's an advantage, I hear.
Yeah. Wouldn't know firsthand, though, eh?
Yeah, that's pretty much my experience from the 2 Reason Cons I've been to, yeah.
No, right on. Sounds like a lot of fun. The only conference I've ever had or gone to was the one that we had here in Saskatchewan, and I was an organizer, so it didn't really have that relaxing feel.
Yeah, you need to just be a guest. If you're organizing anything like that, I know from the people who do the ones I've been to, yeah, it's pretty much nonstop for weeks before and then the weekend. You don't get much off time.
Yeah, it was pretty hectic. So, if one had to compare the online community when you were starting and the online community now, what do you think are the major differences?
Well, I would say that people used to be nicer, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I think it's just you find people that you have something in common with, and then you have this weird idea that you're going to get along and agree with on everything. And we've kind of learned over time that that's not always the case. And there have been falling outs. As I mentioned, podcasts come and go. People come and go from being active members of the community, and they might just have life changes, or they just decide they don't want to deal with it anymore. And you do put yourself out there, and there's definitely a potential positive and negative to it.
Yeah, I suppose that's true, eh? Especially, like, if you do get a following, then there are people who kind of pick apart some of the things you say and do, and I think podcasts are probably a little better than YouTube, but...
Well, I mean, I'm kind of in both worlds, because I started doing YouTube because that was just the only way I knew how to record the audio.
Right.
And I still do a mostly live show. It used to be the entire thing was live and that was it. And now I record the intro, outro separately just so I can kind of gather my thoughts, get a little bit from the interview and put that in the pre-part. But yeah, I mean, YouTube, I don't get that much of it, but I've definitely noticed that you get kind of random people out of left field that come in and say really mean things, or you can tell that they have some kind of issue going on, and it's like, right. What's the benefit of engaging? Sometimes you want to benefit because you see the atheist community as like, well, there are people who are coming out and maybe they don't have any friends and they've lost family members and you want to reach out, but now it's like people seem to be looking to attack.
Yeah. I remember I used to be really defensive. Like, I'd see somebody who would criticize the atheist community, and I like calling them bigots or what have you. And I thought I would get really defensive because all I ever saw was like this community that was supportive of people who were leaving religion and were calling out like problematic areas of society and supporting LGBT Q people coming out and all that stuff. And then, I don't know, slowly but surely I've started to kind of see some of the more problematic aspects of the community.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I still think for the most part, the podcasting community is pretty supportive. I think part of the reason is that there just aren't that many people who make a living off of it. And it definitely changes the game for people if it is a living. Like, people, right. I think, have to be a little more careful because this is it. Like, you're at the whims of whatever Patreon is deciding to do this week. Or especially, like, I mean, on the YouTube side, they've definitely demonetized a lot of videos. Not that I would know what monetize means. But for some people, they've been making at least somewhat of a living off of it, and then it disappears. And then they have to change their way of going about it. But I've just seen a very similar kind of starting story for most people, that they just wanted to talk, and they wanted to be able to talk about this subject for an hour or however long a week and not worry about what other people are going to say. And that's the advantage of podcasting. You can have interviews, but you can definitely control what the message is and who you're going to talk with. And you're generally going to talk with, in at least my case, mostly with people that I'm going to agree with. And I'm okay with that. I don't feel like it's that much of an echo chamber.
Yeah, I'm not sure I really buy the whole echo chamber thing anyway. Like, I live in a conservative area with conservative people all around me, and I'm the only liberal then in my place of work, or leftist in my place of work. And I mean, if I have an online echo chamber, that just that actually gives me more diversity in a sense.
Yeah, I guess you always think of Canada as this, progressive heaven, but I think there's definitely mix everywhere you are.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we don't have we don't have Republicans, because our conservatives are still not Republicans. They're not quite the same thing, but we do have like libertarians, and like we do have a lot of similar elements, even if we don't go quite as extreme in a lot of ways.
Didn't you have a lot of people wanting to like move on your couch after the last election here in America?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Though I'm not sure that would have done anybody any good. The news is the same no matter where we are.
Yeah, there's no escaping it, I suppose.
So, if you had to pick a favorite interview from the past 3 years, who would be your favorite person to interview?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there's such a fluctuation. You think of like the most popular people or the best known, and of course having the Scathing Atheist on was a good one. It was back before Eli joined. It was just Noah and Heath.
Yeah,
but that was a good one. Just you've probably interviewed a few people yourself, and when you've talked to people and you kind of give them the softball and you've heard the answer before, and they kind of go off a script, and you're kind of like, I want to try to ask them something different, but at the same time, I want to make sure that everybody gets what they want.
Yeah.
But that was a pretty good mix, because they were definitely fun to have. Pretty early on in the show, I had the only member of the was Secular Therapy Project, and it was the only therapist out of the state of Georgia.
Okay.
And that was one that I don't even know if she's still involved with that, because you did definitely lose track with people.
Right.
But it was interesting to hear about somebody who did like an internship in like rural Indiana and was dealing with people who were getting out of religion and having their family basically shun them, and
wow, what
do they do next? And just having a secular therapist option, because a lot of times one of the first questions you might get from a therapist is what church you go to.
Right.
For me, that's just living in the South. I don't know. But it's been,
I know.
It's been all over the place. I mean, I've interviewed people who do shows and they have 100,000 listeners a week, and then it's just people that I've talked to that don't have a show and just have a story they want to share. And it started out as a very much like question number 2 was, what's your religious background? And I don't think I've asked that question in like 3 months, because sometimes I'll have repeat guests, and usually we have a topic to hit, and religion isn't necessarily on the top of the list. It's just, I don't know, it can be a starting point, but it doesn't always have to be that.
Yeah. I think, did you interview, you interviewed like No Illusions on a solo one-on-one type interview, I don't know, years ago. I think I watched that one like before I ever actually, when my podcast was still pretty new.
Well, it was him and Heath. They're both on the one I did.
Okay.
So I know I now, because they always seem, well, no, I feel like Noah gets on separately. I think I need to get a solo Heath. Mm-hmm. People forget about him,
Yeah, that's right.
He's still a very important part of the group.
Yeah, he does kind of get lost in the mix, though, with 2 very large personalities around him.
That's true. It happens.
So, I guess you recently kind of had some, or maybe it's a few months ago now, after you were on with the rest of the Brainstorm crew, you had some medical issues going on?
I did a story that was in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about a hospitalization that I had in 2001. It was a near-death experience.
Okay.
But that was I was writing that at the time.
That was.
I'm trying to remember when. Well, it was like, when was the show recorded and when was it posted? And, trying to remember all those. It's not like I do a ton of guest spots, but I'll have to.
It's a little while ago now.
It was like it might have been last December. I was probably working on that because, and I don't know if you want me to tell the story, but so my wife got me into a storytelling class last fall, and the story I told was of being in a room with my mom, and she'd said, why don't we do something normal today? And we were not feeling very normal at the time. So she turned on the TV, and the first thing that we saw was a plane fly into a building, because it was 9/11.
Right.
And the setup was that I had been in a medically induced coma for about 3 weeks, and my mom had been pretty much living in the hospital for 3 weeks, sort of partially taking care of me. And I had just gotten out.
Oh, wow.
Because I had a staph infection and had to be put in a coma. And so the story was kind of my, here's what happened to me on 9/11. And just
right.
somehow had this story to tell. And because I took this class, the woman who ran the class knew an editor at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And they do these long-form stories called personal journeys. And I got to write mine. And it was in the newspaper around my birthday this year. And so now that's like the thing I've written that's been read the most. And it's definitely a weird story to tell because this happened 2001. So it happened almost 17 years ago.
Right.
But to get to kind of go back and try to remember what it felt like and talk to my parents who both quit their jobs and moved into a hospital and lived with me for 2 months, and just kind of recalling the ups and downs of the near-death experience and having to go back in a couple of times and having to have a couple blood transfusions and the long-term, I still have some numbness in one of my legs, so it's definitely something that's stuck with me. And it's the one, traumatic story that I can tell.
Right. So, with your near-death experience, did you experience what everybody else kind of talks about with felt like you left your body and all that stuff?
Well, the drugs they give you to put you in a coma are pretty rough. And then the ones they give you to get you out of the coma are even worse. And I had a bunch of crazy hallucinations during the time. One of them, the nurse was trying to kill me and telling me that if I told my parents that she would kill me, and just very intense. So that was why on 9/11 I asked my mother, did this really happen? Because I was having these dreams at night and sweating through the sheets and all that.
Right.
And I do remember having a dream where I watched my vital signs go down to 0, and I just kind of thought to myself, well, this is just what happens. You just die and nothing happens. But I do try to tell people, I'm like, this is something that happened to me while I was heavily medicated. So that doesn't mean that that's what really happens.
Right.
It just means this is my experience, and most likely, if I had died, there wouldn't have been a last memory. It just lights would have gone out.
Right.
But I don't know, and neither do you, so that's one of those things.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting. I can't say that I've ever had anything quite like that. I mean, I've been on drugs and I've hallucinated, but never in that kind of near-death sense.
Yeah, I mean, it was intense, that's for sure. And as I was coming out of it, my parents had gotten really close with the chaplain, and they prayed some, but at the time I didn't really think much about religion.
Right.
I don't think this was the thing that quote unquote launched it. It just never, with me, it just never was there. I didn't have a religious background, and maybe if I did, it would have been something I would have had to overcome, or maybe I'd still be there. I just don't know. My experience is there wasn't anything. And all of a sudden I realized that the nothing was something.
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah, and eventually it became a show.
Yeah. No, that's cool. So in, I guess, 148 interviews, how many of those are repeats? Just off the top of your head, I guess. Not that you gotta go back.
Might be up to like 20, and I've had a few people on multiple times. Every once in a while, I'd do like a panel where I'd have a few people on, and I always thought, well, first of all, I thought, I'm going to run out of people, and that'll never happen. But then it's like, well, should I have somebody back on? Well, I mean, I just had on, Jeremiah Traeger, who was Jeremiah the Prophet on No Religion Required when I interviewed him episode 21, and tonight, it's more than 3 years later, he's doing a YouTube show, and he's doing another podcast, and
right.
People go through a lot of changes. There are not too many people like me who seem to be doing similar kind of show every week. Normally, shows have to go through changes or they end up dying.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to do the same show and try to do any kind of quality with that. Like, I think of shows like Cognitive Dissonance and Scathing Atheist that at the surface you think, man, it's the same show every week, but they have to come up with a different version of that.
Right,
and they do, and it's hard to do. And the people who can come out with a show on the same day every week, that's just, I don't do that because I don't know. I'm just not that person who goes, well, I'm recording Monday at 8, show up at 8, and it's just whenever my guest can show up, I record, and then I try to get one out every week. I've missed a few, but for the most part.
I know, I've been doing my show for about 4 years, almost 5 years now. And it's, for me, like it's tough to maintain that life podcast balance. Like, I can't imagine the guys who like actually record every week and like do editing and like invest time all the time. And I feel like I do a lot, but it seems like a lot for somebody to invest that extra time all the time.
Well, I think that's why for me, I was doing like a football show every week, but it was on YouTube, and I'm like, oh, if you do it live, then you just post that audio and you're done. But for some dumb reason, over the past few weeks, I've been like, well, I'm going to do a 45-minute interview, and then I have to write an intro and an outro, and occasionally edit when the audio dies. I've become one of those editing people, and it does take more time, but it's like, oh, I should do a daily show, or I should do twice a week. And it's like, no, once a week is enough, at least for me.
Do you have other people in your life that you are not spending time with when you're spending time doing this podcast stuff?
Not spending time with my wife and my 2 cats.
Well, what does your wife think of that?
I don't know. She has a podcast too.
Oh, is that right?
It's like once a week. It's called Literary Atlanta.
No. Oh, so it's not atheist related.
It's it's all about, it's very focused very much about the literary scene in Atlanta, and it tends to be interviewing authors who are going to come into town and do like an event that's coming up.
That's really cool.
Which is weird for me because like I live in Atlanta, but I've only interviewed a few people who are like Atlanta based, and I've only met a couple. I tend to meet people more at conferences that aren't in Atlanta. I don't know why that is, but
is there a big atheist community in Atlanta?
I've heard rumors of that. There's a former church that's like a free thought hall.
Oh, that's
and
neat.
They have a different group like every Sunday, but I've only been a few times. Like there's Sunday assembly. I mean, there's everything. There's groups for anything you want to find, but they're out there. I just don't think of it. Or it's like Sunday half the year is when I'm like watching American football, so I don't. I have my own church going on.
Yeah. I guess how big is Atlanta? Is it a pretty big place?
I think there's like 7 million people in Atlanta now.
Oof. Yeah, that's pretty big.
It's grown a lot. I mean, I moved here in 96. I moved here the year the Olympics were here. And I feel like the town's at least double the size.
Oh, wow.
It's like, it's where all the people from the south come, and then the people come from the north. I don't know if it's the biggest city in the south, but it's gotta be. I think it is, yeah. So it's a hub for sure.
Right. That's wild. I can't imagine living in a place that big. The entire province that I live in is like about 1 million people, a little over 1 million people. The city that I live in is right around 300,000. So
yeah, it's all spread out up there, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
And you're central Canada, is there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's in the middle there, and pretty close to the North Dakota border. Like, I'm probably 5 miles away from the border now.
Oh, so you would be popular if people try to rush the border. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess, what do you think of the current state of the atheist community?
I mean, it's definitely I'd say there have been better times, but at the same time, I mean, you can really focus on that. I mean, for a while, I was trying to reach out and find more of the like progressive YouTubers, because there's just like the rumor or the idea that most of the atheists who are on YouTube are of the center right variety.
Yeah.
And it does seem like if you think what you think's going on in the atheist community is bad, like try the YouTube community. It's like, it's just kind of crazy. But you can find any community you want, and eventually, I think people still try the line of like, why don't you just stick to atheism? It's like, atheism is just something we don't believe, and the only thing that makes it stand out is the fact that most people do.
Right.
But then you want to talk about social issues. Oh no, it's not social issues, and but there's this idea, I guess, that people don't want to be like dogmatic and led in a particular direction. It's like, you don't have to be. But with certain groups, you find out that it's like, well, if you want to be part of this group, you kind of have to believe these 5 things. You're like, oh, okay, well, at least I know.
Yeah.
But it's tough. I mean, there's a lot of negativity going around, and I think it's just the goal of the current administration here is just distract as much as possible, and we're going to just try to suck as much money out of this situation as we can before it all falls apart.
Right.
And we're wondering if it's going to fall apart.
Yeah, I really feel kind of bad for you guys down there. Like, anybody who's not revolving their life around triggering liberals is kind of in a shit boat right now. Like, what are you supposed to do until November? And even then, you still only have so much impact in the midterms. Yeah,
it's been definitely an up and down time in America. Like, since I've been politically aware, I guess it's like somehow we elected Reagan twice, and somehow we elected W twice. Even after he led us into this just awful war, it's like, we elected Nixon twice. We've had some rough times. And then we had Obama, and we're feeling like, yeah, we're doing okay. But it was just the perfect time for bad, and people act like Hillary Clinton's like a shadow president because there's still like people attacking her as if she's in some kind of office. And it's just, I don't know, people maybe just stick to their guns more than they should, and people do seem quicker to anger than they usually are.
Right.
And you want to be sensitive all the time, but then sometimes you're just like, I want to be in a space where I just want to say what I think, even though maybe that wasn't the best thing to say at the time. But you definitely want to be sensitive of what space you're in and what people are going through. Right. I think that's why I can do this show, because I'm in a relatively privileged position. Like, I'm not putting a job at risk by having this show, and I'm not necessarily super public about it anyway. Right. And it's not a super duper popular show, but I'm still like amazed to see that people are listening to it and supporting it and giving it love, because I really just do one thing. I'm going to interview people. I'm not going to do skits. I'm not necessarily going to talk about the news. I'm just going to have a person on and talk to them every week, and that's the goal.
It is kind of nice to catch that like positive feedback every now and then, even if it's not, all the time. It's just nice to get it every now and then.
Well, I guess I like it. I just don't always take it to heart. I think I try. I take a negativity and go, well, I can say something meaner about myself than you can, right? And be kind of down about my abilities and the fact that I don't really edit. And I have a microphone and all, but I do record over YouTube and just burn the audio. And the only thing I usually edit is the last couple weeks. There have been some parts of the show where the internet connection just didn't work out and it just was quiet. So yeah, you want to get rid of that. But if someone clicks a lot, okay, that might stay in the show. And at least I notice these things, but I have to, it's like if I was going to put on a perfect show, I would never put on a show. That's my idea. And I think sometimes in life, you just got to go, you're trying to write a book, but you're like, oh, I'm scared because I have to write 100,000 words. Well, you're never going to finish it. You got to write that bad first draft. You got to do the
that's right.
bad first edition of a show. I mean, one thing I like to do when because it used to be mostly podcasters, I would listen to their first episode and listen to their last episode. And if you listen to a show that has 300 episodes, there's going to be a very big difference.
Right. You still do quite a bit of listening when you have somebody new on, don't you?
I try to. I mean, that's what makes it difficult for me, is because every week I'm meeting new people and learning about new shows. And then it's like, well, I'm listening to 5 or 10 episodes of the next week's guests show and trying to come up with quotes for them out of context and stuff and try to come up with good questions,
right?
Questions that most people would want to hear answered, and then, random stuff. But yeah, you got to do it. And maybe that's a benefit of getting people on you've had on before, is you have that kind of rapport and you have that base. True. And the people listening usually know who Marissa, Alexa, and McCool, but they won't know somebody who's relatively new. There's some local guys do a show called Godless Heathens, and they were actually in Atlanta, so I got to go to their house and record at their studio, which was different because usually it's in my office with my cat scratching at my door. Because that's where pretty much all the interviews have been.
Where did you come up with the out of context quotes?
It started when I was listening to Dogma Debate back in the day, and I would and I feel like at the time he was definitely kind of saying things that he knew were ridiculous, and some people do that, and I was like, okay, so out of context quotes. It's funny, some people, when you say that, they act super panicked, you're really trying to say something bad about them, and it's trying to be. Usually it's funny type stuff, and then sometimes it's just I'll say something inspirational the person said. It doesn't have to be out of context, but that's just been my thing. I mean, I was talking with Jeremiah tonight, and one of his was, "I'd need new pants now." And he was like, "What did I say that?" It's good to catch somebody and they're like, "I don't remember that."
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one, actually. You can infer all kinds of things from that.
Exactly. That's the goal.
That's awesome. So you also have a thing where you get your guests to tell a joke. So have you been doing that the whole time too?
I'm going to give it over to show superfan Jeannie. She's the one who asked me to do that, and I don't even know how long that's been, maybe 20 episodes or so. And I know one week I even tried to say a joke and it didn't go well because it wasn't well constructed, but Yeah, it's another one, like, it's taken, like, out of context. Like, most of the time people play along with it. Other times you can tell they're not feeling comfortable, and you're like, all right, we'll move on. But generally speaking, like, it seems like the kid-having people tend to have, the dad-type jokes, which are fine, too.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a comedian by any stretch, but I do enjoy, like, bad jokes sometimes.
I think there's a time for it, and you definitely now want to be able to laugh, and sometimes just laugh in a way where you're not doing it at somebody's expense. You're just something catches you in a weird way, and you're able to just have a moment of you're just relaxed, and that's good. And it's of course a good idea to get people relaxed. I don't necessarily worry about that. I mean, sometimes getting on a Google Hangout can be a technical experience, but
right.
Of course, another advantage of talking to mostly podcasters is they've done a bunch of interviews or they have their own setup, so they're good with audio. Yeah. I mean, there are a couple of guests where they wanted to do like a show or talk in advance just to make sure like I wasn't some random, weirdo, because it is. I mean, sometimes you get in circles, you get lazy where you're like, well, I'm just going to go to the Facebook Atheist podcaster group and ask if anyone's available. Because it is weird sometimes to go on like Twitter and just reach out to a random stranger and say you want to do an interview.
Yeah.
Unless they're the kind of person who always does interviews, and then, it's just a matter of. It's like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I used to do like fantasy football interviews. And that was a similar community in that it wasn't that big. Okay. Even the biggest people weren't superstars. Like, you still wouldn't know their name. So anybody you'd ask, usually the only time you get to know is if somebody wasn't available. And that's usually the case with atheist podcasters. There aren't too many people who have a lot of layers between you and them. Like, oh, no, you have to talk to, like, my manager. It's like, nobody... Who is a manager? Just some people are really busy and they get tons of messages and they don't hear back. But, I mean, for the most part, like, Scathing Atheist, they do that Farnsworth quote thing where you can post a quote. Well, I sent mine in and I also said, hey, you want to do an interview? And it was probably 4 months later they got back to me. And sometimes it's that the way. But I'm such a lazy planner that I usually am like the week before going, oh, crap, I need somebody. So luckily I talk to people who have somewhat open schedules and are able to do it in a timely fashion.
That helps. I find that my evenings and weekends are often packed with family stuff. Like, so doing interviews and stuff in the evening doesn't really work for me, but everybody in the world works during the day. So it's tough to fit things into when everybody's schedule works.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you were posting on Facebook saying, man, this person I'm trying to get for this interview has been difficult. I'm like, I think you're talking about me, because you were like, hey, can we do it during the day? And it's like, well, I have this job thing during the day, and then nights didn't work. And I know we had a couple of, I've been there too, where it's like you reach out to somebody and then like 5 minutes before they're like, oh, can't make it, or oh, something happened. Or yeah, for the most part, it's like, for me, it's like Tuesday or Thursday is usually it. I know I've done a couple on a weekday during the day, and I did one, it was Atheist Talk out of Minnesota, and it was like 9 a.m. on a Sunday. And I still had a beer for that one, so.
Nice.
Representing. It's all about the brand,
So, about the beer, like, have you always been into like different craft beers and microbrews or whatever, the different beers?
Yeah, the beer scene's definitely blown up. It was, I think when I moved to Atlanta, there might have been 3 microbreweries, and now they're like 40 some in the state of Georgia, or I think in the Atlanta area. And it's just great if you like everything, then you can find something you like. If you like very specific styles, you're there. I'm like a sours and like stouts, like barrel-aged stouts are my style. And I don't know, I've gotten into it. I found a community online, and the great thing is people are the same in a beer community they are in any other community. It's you ask somebody a question like, oh, should I age my beer? And like one person will say hell yes, and the next person will say hell no. And then you just have to make up your own mind and decide what you really wanted to do in the first place. So yeah, it's all over, and it's fun. It's something I enjoy for sure.
I mean, I guess I've never been into like special beers or anything. Like I drink whatever, like I always drank Canadian, which is, I don't know even know what kind of beer it would be considered, but just a farmer beer, I guess. Like, that was what I drank as a young person. That's what I drank growing up, and that's what I drink now. So,
well, I mean, one thing to do is, yeah, you got to find people who will actually kind of push you through. I had a friend who did like a bottle share, and I went there and people had a bunch of really hard to find beers that I didn't even know anything about. And then eventually you get to know these people. And I mean, if you go to breweries, usually they'll do like flights where you get to have like 5 different beers and it'll have all their different styles. And then after trying that, you kind of get a baseline of like, well, I really like this style beer and I really don't like this style.
Right.
And you discover stuff that you didn't know was possible to do. The flavor combinations are crazy. I had a beer that I posted on my Facebook page. It had catnip in it. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to try that. But I'm interested that somebody's tried that.
That is interesting.
I can't. I'm like, flavor profile and why?
It's just for their cat, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of beers where they like sent the hops into space and then they make, I don't know, it's all crazy.
I guess it to some degree it is like anything where once you start getting into like different ways of doing things, people will just try anything.
True, yeah. And then I don't know, I've actually found out that I've been kind of narrowing. Like I liked a lot more and lately I haven't, but it's okay because if there's any kind of beer you like, there's 50 versions of it out there.
Right.
There usually isn't like, oh, there's just this one beer that only comes out once a year and there's only like, you can only get a couple bottles and that's it. It's, if you know of one, then there's going to be a few versions of it because people are obviously going to try to copy what's good. Just like when you start doing a podcast, well, how do you do it? Well, just listen to other shows and go, well, I'll try to do this or I'll try to do that, or I'll try to do a news show. I'll try to do an interview show, or I'll try to do skits or anything, or I'm going to do a panel show. Just find a template, do it, and then find your version of it.
Yeah, doing my show like with the panel was always really made it easier because I didn't have to be the one who did everything in a sense. Like I didn't have to do all the thinking or all the talking. but over the years, it's kind of increased to be like a lot of extra work, even though there's other people carrying part of the load.
I don't know. I guess I don't share well.
Yeah.
It does seem like there aren't too many shows that are just one person, or if there is one person, then they have like an editor or something. Right. Or someone who helps them book guests. Because it is all on me, but then to try to schedule like a co-host, I don't know.
Yeah, it adds another element to it, right?
It does. I mean, I used to do a football show and I had a co-host, but we were just like Wednesday, 8:00 pretty much every week. Okay, right. We're doing it. And there wouldn't be a ton of preparation. Just be like, we'd show up and talk about whatever.
Yeah. That's the nice thing about doing the panel show. Like every second Friday was always the night that we did the show. And once you get into a routine, then people just do that. They know that's when it's doing. I don't really have much else to ask you. Is there anything you can think of that you want to say about what it's been like to interview the atheist community as much as you have?
I don't know. I always thought there would be a time where I'd feel intimidated or nervous, but it's been fun. I felt welcomed by people. It's been fun to go to Reason Con and get to meet people and to, say, oh, I listened to your show, and then have people actually say that to you and go, no, wait, that's a good thing. And it's okay.
Right.
And I don't know. It's like, will I run out of people to talk to? It's very unlikely. I just want to make sure to be, to get as many voices out there and try to see the, positivity in the community, because it's still a net positive, because there isn't much choice. It's like you think of all the battles that are going on, and some of them seem kind of ridiculous, but I don't know, they seem to drive our culture in a way, and you got to decide, are you helping that culture in a positive way or a negative way? And everything you do, it's like you can pretend to just drop out and not have anything to do with it, but that you're kind of making a decision by not deciding to. So I'm just gonna keep talking, and generally speaking, I'm probably gonna agree with my guests for the most part, but it's always fun to hear stories and to be surprised by people and just hear different points of view. Because there's a lot of struggle going on now, and we gotta kind of lean on each other.
That seems like a good place to leave it. I guess, where can people find your stuff?
Well, I like to say at the end of my show, Zachrilegecast, and that's Zachrilege, and I can spell it after 2 beers, so can you. So Zachrilegecast, 2 words, is the show. Zachrilege is the Twitter account. There's a Facebook page where I try to post some of the shows I'm listening to. But pretty much, it's on YouTube. It's on all podcatchers. And the YouTube live version comes out. And then about 2 days later, the podcast version comes out when I have time to edit. And really, anybody, you got a show, you don't have a show, you have a story, reach out to me and I'll get you on. Because I think it's great to get people's stories out there.
Right on, for sure. Well, thank you, sir, for joining me, and have a good one.
I'm glad we made it through the tundra. I know it's the summer, it's not tundra.
Yeah,
I know you see the sun occasionally up there. It's great.
It's on its way down right now, actually. Okay, so that's it for the interview. It was a really cool chat. More informal and a bit less focused than some of my other ones, but I think that's a great way to get to know people. It's kind of the way that Zach does his show all the time. So if you like that informal chat type of show, then head over and give him a listen. We are getting back to the regular swing of things soon. Make sure to follow the Brainstorm podcast on Spreaker to get notified when we go live on Friday at 8:30 p.m. Saskatchewan time. That is also Mountain Daylight time. I'll post an event on Facebook as well, so you can go and click the attending button, and that'll give you a reminder as well. I'm not doing any feedback, reviews, or any of that stuff on this episode. I'm going to save it for the next live show. For all the things, you can check out Brainstorm Podcast, thebrainstormpodcast.com, or our website, brainstormblog.net. Thanks to our financial supporters, Bassett, Keith, Kim, Janet, Stephanie, Zach, the Utah Outcasts, Will, Aaron, Daryl, Bob Glenn, Destin Doesn't Suck That Much, Magnus, several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave, Positively Skeptical, Rob, Chris, and Larry. If you want to join them and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. Or you can go buy some stuff. tpublic.com/stores/brainstorm-podcast-gear. Thanks to Dave for our intro music. Thanks to Aaron Rabbi for doing the voiceover for the intro. You can find his podcast at voidpod.com. Thanks to Alex Capper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for our ads, and thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff at aloststateofmind.com. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, share the show, and spread the word. I know that this is kind of by rote, but I really want to emphasize that if you share the show around, it means a lot. If you retweet or share to your own Facebook group, Facebook page, it means a world to the show, and it means a lot to me, and it helps people discover it. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.